and this is my research speech. So, what I'm researching, or what I have been researching this year, is firefighting. And why I chose firefighting was because every time I came in and encountered a firefighter, they just always seemed happy and they enjoyed what they did so much. I even interviewed some firefighters that continuously said that it's the best profession in the world, and I was like, that's just awesome to me, even though everything they go through. Another thing that I really respected about firefighters was that they just work, and their ethic and their culture just seems to be above this world. It also fits my personality very well because of the fact that I love to stay physical, and my real goal in life is just to help people in whatever way I can, whether that means like saving their life or helping them get through a tough time. And firefighting would be a great way to save people's lives, of course. Ooh, I think I lost it for a second. There we go. About the job, firefighters have to stay at the station for a pretty long time. Um, a lot of the time, when they get called into duty, they have to save lives, but they stay at the station for, it depends. Sometimes it's 4 days on, 3 days off, or 3 days on, 4 days off. But there are statistical studies that show that if they stay there and on the last day, um, they tend to struggle, and that's when a lot of the accidents happen with firefighters, and where a lot of firefighters get hurt. Um, the thing about firefighting is that it pays pretty well, and you can move up in as a fire chief, or this from a firefighter you can move up to a fire chief, fire captain. All those different levels of firefighting vary with pay too. But of course, that's not what the profession's about. It's more about helping people and just having the best job in the world. Um, Another thing about firefighting is that the station becomes a second family to firefighters. It's like another home. It's where you're hanging around your guys, and sometimes there's female firefighters as well. But you're just hanging around, playing video games or training. All of that stuff. It's all with them. So when I determined what to research, I first wanted to look into the basics of firefighting because, of course, the basics with anything is like the most important. And I feel like a lot of people tend to forget that the basics are like the foundation of what you should know. So that's what I looked into first. Later, I looked into becoming a leader because I've always been told growing up that I'm a leader, and sometimes I questioned that because I wasn't sure what I was leading or how I was leading. So I looked into that and how to become a great leader, especially in firefighting. Another thing I looked into was the stressor of the job, which I'll get into more, just because when you get into a job, there's good things about jobs, but it's important to understand that there can be some negatives, especially with firefighting. Later, after that, I looked into the firefighter training and just what they go through training. And then the EMT firefighting piece I learned from Billy Hughes. He actually brought this up to me, just talking about the EMT portion of firefighting, or the EMT part of firefighting, and just firefighting by itself, and that they can be two different things. So the basis of firefighting is that a large amount of time goes into studying and preparing for scenarios that you don't know that you might run into, you may not run into, but just being prepared to save somebody's life. Um, and the basics can get kind of repetitive, especially with firefighting, but it's important to keep on it. Um, I know I talked to my mentor personally, and he tells me that every time they get to the station or a new shift comes in, they have to check all the equipment to make sure it's still running and working correctly, and just keeping all that in mind, that you stay busy as well. Um, but the basics are so important. It can mean the difference between saving somebody's life and them dying. It's just having that study time and keeping that ingrained with you. The other thing I looked into was becoming a great leader, and I felt like this was really important because everybody in the station has to be a leader at some point, because you're coming into scenarios where you're dealing with hurt people and different things like that. So this job really requires a lot of selflessness and like not a carefree attitude, but putting yourself second in a way. Um, Especially as a fire chief, you have to keep in mind that you have the whole crew's safety and health in your hands whenever you're on a fire call. Um, One of the firefighters I talked to actually, they went into, uh, they got a call to go into a house and protect it. He lives in California. He's a firefighter in California. They protected it from the wildfires because they've been crazy recently. They're protecting the house from wildfires, and there was a bunch of other rigs and engines all through the neighborhood. And they had to have like 5 plans to keep the fire out of the house. And the flames got taller than the house. He told me, and after that, he told me that their house was the only house standing because of how prepared they were. But at times, they had to put on their breathing apparatus because of the fact that the smoke got so bad. But he said that at the end of that, that house was the only house standing on that street, and how that feeling was pretty good. And that was just because he planned and he prepared for the fires compared to the other firefighters. It was kind of like a competition in a way. Um, but also as a leader, it's important to see strengths of your peers and the weaknesses of your peers, because you don't want to put somebody in on the ground or to drive the fire truck and get you in trouble if they can't get you there in time, and that could hurt somebody else. But it's also important to see your own weaknesses as well, so you could help and benefit the team in that way, with your strengths, of course. Um, and in the field, it's life or death. So you gotta know what you're doing, and you gotta act on it quick. Um, One of my mentor told me is that you can't always be a hero, um, because you got other people's health and lives at mind. Some stressors of the job. So this is where I talk about it's important to see both sides of the job, and a lot of the times firefighters tend to let their pride get the best of them. But a lot of the things firefighters sees you can't unsee. I even talked with Billy Hughes about some of the stuff he's seen. Um, it's just they could be tough, and I feel like therapy can be pretty necessary for firefighters. Personally, I feel like that should be a very big part of the job. A statistical fact is that 1 out of 5 firefighters will suffer from PTSD just from the things they see and the things they deal with on the day-to-day basis. Um, and personally, I know that having people's lives in my hand would feel like the weight of the world, especially when you're going to sleep at night and you hear that alarm go off to tell you that you have to go help save somebody's life. You never know what you're going to expect. You just don't know. And so I feel like as a firefighter, on those off days, you got to see therapy and just keep your mental health correct, because that's a really important thing. With anything, of course. Firefighter training is something that they do on a daily basis to stay in shape and to keep their mind right. This is a everyday thing. Firefighters also have some free. It depends on the culture of the station. The culture of the station really depends on the age group that's in the station and where the station's located. So if the station's located in a more busy area like Dallas, they have to deal with more things and they get more calls. And that's usually where the younger guys go, because they like to stay, like they feel like they're doing something. A lot of times the older guys in the older stations, just not chill, but not have such a busy schedule because they're old timers. But yeah, on firefighters' free times, I've talked to many firefighters, and they say they play Xbox, they watch football games, TV, like they just vibe a lot, and I think that's really cool. They eat, they like, cook for each other, all those fun things. But that's also where they have their study time, and they train for different scenarios that they may encounter because of they don't know what they're going to see on the field. Firefighting EMT is a very important part, and I feel like the EMT part is almost more important because of what I've heard from my interviews. A lot of my, whenever I was in those interviews, they told me that I should go to EMT school first because it'll look better whenever I try to get hired by firefighting. Because they told me that to get certified for firefighting isn't super difficult, but the EMT part is what really matters. So my goal is to go to school and get my EMT certification and then get my firefighter certification. Um, but as a firefighter, you get to get certified for both anyway. But just to have that under your belt is really nice because you can go to college for firefighting on the side and do both. Um, there's also many fire academy schools here in Texas. There's actually one in Collin College that's pretty cheap, I've heard. And my mentor also told me that there's one at A&M that's very well known and pretty good. Um, at times, the reason EMT is so important is because firefighters really do need to know more than doctors know, just because the things they run into, they're the first responders, so they have to know what to treat, what medicine to use, and how to act in certain situations. Especially if somebody's like their arm is off, or they have to know what pain medicine. They just have to know all aspects of the body to be able to have a procedure on that person before they get them to the doctor. Um, Another thing about this field is it's very competitive. So my goal is to get in and apply to all the places around the country to try to get hired. Important thing, Billy Hughes, he told me about a story when there was a kid, and it was a little kid, and he was having a breathing problem. And he was telling me that he had to think on his feet, and that this kid was probably going to die if he didn't treat him. And he had a breathing apparatus, but instead of having the normal like inhaler, he put Benadryl in it to open up the lungs. And he said that it worked, but if it didn't work, then that could have killed, that could have died, and that person's lives could have been on his hands. And so it's just important to know that people's lives are in your hand, and you can get backlash for potentially killing somebody. Here's my mentor, somebody I keep mentioning. His name is Anthony Cullen, and he's a fairly new firefighter. He lives in Irving, and he's been so great. He's been so nice and been able to give me so much information about what he does and how he interacts with firefighters and what to expect when going into future interviews, and even going into depth about how the chiefs, before they hire you through the hiring process, they will go to your neighborhood and ask your neighbors what kind of person you are and if you've done anything that they don't agree with, which is pretty crazy. He's such a happy person and joyful person, and he's like not like he's a mentor, but I look up to him as a person too. And I think it's amazing how he could balance his work and home life just with the 4 days on and 3 days off. And I think that's such a cool thing to see. One of the last things is a quote that holds a lot of value to me is, "I will not lose, for even in defeat, there's a valuable lesson learned, so it evens up for me." This quote is by Jay-Z, and it's something I've been going by for a while just because I feel like a lot of people nowadays are so scared of failure, and even though that's the way that we learn as people, and failure's like a building block and foundation to grow from, and you should really embrace it because, I mean, you only live once. So I appreciate you taking the time for listening to my research presentation. I hope you have a good night.